Thank you very much, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be a part of such a well-organized, stimulating conference. Since I have a historical topic, perhaps the audience will indulge me with a couple of historical comments before I actually begin. It was on this day in 1988, April the 15th, 1988, that the University of Alabama dedicated the James B. McMillan building. James B. McMillan was for many years on the faculty here, and that building was the home of the University of Alabama Press. McMillan founded that press, which for long was one of the few places in the country where linguistic titles could be published. And it was home to the American Dialect Society publication for more than 2 decades. Jim McMillan was a very modest man. He had a lexicographer's economy of language, and at that dedication ceremony in 1988, he had few words to say. About his only comment was, "I'm pleased that there's finally something else to remember the 15th of April for than taxes." He was a stalwart in the study of Southern American English, and he will long be missed. About this time of year, 25 years ago, LAVIS 1 was born. Guy Bailey and I had been in graduate school together at the University of Tennessee, and we shared a strong interest in the English of the American South. In the 1960s and early 70s, the scholarly positions on how similar or different white and black speech were in the country, and not just in the South, had hardened and become increasingly rancorous. As Guy and I talked about this, we realized how much new research had recently been undertaken, and the idea to organize a conference was born. Our goals were several: to present new research and new researchers, and thereby to open dialogue and work toward a consensus on the issues. The support from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the University of South Carolina, we assembled 24 speakers in October 1981 for what was, by all accounts, a very successful conference. And a volume of papers in due course came out of that conference. Looking back at LAVIS 1 and actually LAVIS 2, 11 years ago at Auburn, one realizes the dearth of historical studies at these conferences. The deficiencies that the present meeting goes a long way to rectify. Such studies, such historical studies, enable us to address many important questions. Over the years, in the course of media interviews, I've been asked two in particular. When did Southern English begin? When did it acquire, develop its own particular type of English? And second, what were the primary contributing streams to English in the South? It's on these matters that I hope to throw some light today, as I argue that it was the century prior to the Civil War that was the crucial one. That was the crucial period in the formation of Southern English. Now, American English took root, of course, with the permanent settlements in Virginia in 1607. Some things would argue for choosing that earliest period between 1607 and the mid-18th century as the crucial century. For one, all of the Atlantic colonies had been founded by 1733. The two cultural hearts in the South, the Chesapeake Bay and the Carolina Low Country centered on Charlestown, had been established for several generations. And a good case for applying McQueen's founder principles can be made for this early period. However, my thesis is that it's the century or so prior to the Civil War, not just the 18th century, as the preliminary title that I submitted to this conference suggests. It was that century prior to the Civil War that represented the crucial period. Beginning actually around 1730, the interior South began rapidly to fill with European-derived settlers, as English speakers expanded rapidly beyond the Atlantic littoral. The backcountry or back settlements of the South that received large infusions actually began at less than 100 miles inland. So this was a very large territory that was beginning to open up and be populated. In the first half of my crucial century, settlement and indigenous groups met and mixed, and situations of language and dialect contact proliferated, producing a linguistic landscape in many ways similar to the one observable today in the South. New dialects were formed, and Southern American English became a distinct perceived variety. From the mid-18th century, the English of the South began evolving toward a regionalized American variety. The transition to more settled development took a generation or two. But down to the American Revolution, the English of coastal areas remained essentially an Atlantic variety, with many similarities with England, New England, many similarities between England, New England, the Chesapeake, the Carolina Low Country, and even parts of the Caribbean. Over the past few years, Guy Bailey, John Tillery, and allied researchers have argued that Southern American English, certainly as we know it today, phonologically and grammatically, is largely a post-Civil War phenomenon. Their provocative arguments are based on evidence from speech, with the one exception of the Tennessee Civil War Veterans Questionnaire, one type of written documents. And they're related to demographic developments in the South following the war. They claim that Southern American English has undergone 4 broad phases. First, transplantation, 1607 to 1790. Second, consolidation and expansion, 1790 to 1880. Third, regionalization, 1880 to 1940. And then transformation, 1940 to the present. Now, I think speech records can only go so far in establishing the genesis of Southern American English. And inevitably, at some point, we need to work more with written text. And using those texts, I think, justifies pushing the date of the second period, in particular, the regionalization, 1790 to 1880, back a generation, if not farther. At the very least, we need to push back the starting point of this period. I take 2 things to be axiomatic in answering the question, when did Southern English develop? When did the American South develop its own type of English? One is that the answer relies on written documents of one kind or another. A second is that this development had only involved linguistic patterns, but also involved ideology and the perception of the South as a distinct region, perhaps as much as the reality of the South as a distinct region. Now, as early as the 1780s, Northern writers like Noah Webster and John Witherspoon noted, and as a matter of fact condemned, characteristic Southern usages as contrary to a national ideal. So the South was beginning, or was perceived to maybe be beginning, to develop its own type of English, even by that time. For one of my 2 focuses today, I choose South Carolina, where I have had the privilege of working and living for the past 23 years.